everyone. It's good to see we got such a nice crowd here in the middle of the day on a Friday to talk about some really big questions when it comes to art. So I wanted to welcome everybody to the Dunedin Fine Art Center. My name is Danny Olda. I'm the curatorial director here. And we're standing in the middle of Underseers, which is the solo exhibition by Jason Lazarus. And so this is part of a series called Seen, Heard. Good art versus bad art versus not art. And we're going to talk about all those questions with my partner here, Taryn. I'll introduce her in just a moment here. But I wanted to kind of speak about why this series came about. You can kind of see it behind me here. A few weeks ago, somebody just walked in, spent a few minutes, and just wrote right over Jason's installation here. And so Jason and I decided to sit on it for a little bit and wait and decide what we should do with this. And we decided to keep it up because we have a lot of conversations about this. What is art actually? And what is an artist's responsibility to the audience to tell them and to not tell them? And what's an audience responsibility when they come and experience an exhibition? But having this up on the wall made all of those really abstract kind of intellectual conversations into something concrete and things that we now actually have to deal with and talk about in some real ways. So we decided to make the most of the situation now, and this is the first of it. We're kind of excited. So I wanted to introduce Taryn here. We've had conversations for the past few weeks, been able to meet together here. And I just want to just read a quick bio about you here. So Taryn was born in Cape Town, South Africa. Her name is Taryn Möller Nicoll. Immigrated to the United States here in 2004. She holds an MFA from Louisiana State University and a DFA with honors from Otis College of Art and Design. And her interdisciplinary practice explores the intersection of fine art, medical science, and the human body, with exhibitions and lectures presented internationally. And alongside her studio work, Taryn is an accomplished curator, arts administrator, and educator with executive leadership in museums and nonprofit organizations. So we're excited. We're going to speak about these questions. And we'll have questions for all of you as well to see your thoughts on all this. But we can go ahead and get started. So it's kind of a three-part question. Good art versus bad art versus not art. And so maybe we can start with the first bit of that. What is art versus what is not art? So I'm just going to start off with this story. Have you heard the story of where the janitorial staff threw away the art on accident?
If any of you are not familiar with this story, you should definitely pay attention. It's deeply enjoyable and I think quite pure and innocent, honestly. This piece was an installation piece displayed at a very, very prestigious museum in Italy by a duo called Goldschmidt and Chiari. And they create these really immersive and subversive, maybe one could say, installations that are deeply critical of the hedonism and excess of their Italian government in the 1980s. So I think that, can we go back one slide, Danny? So what we have with their installation is essentially the aftermath of a wild, reckless party held by the politicians of the really well-renowned politicians in Italy, and they're really well known for living this life of excess. So the title of the piece is called "Where Shall We Go Dancing Tonight?" And it was actually named after a guide to Italian bars and clubs that was created by Italy's Department of Foreign Affairs at the time. So that should be your link right there as to the atmosphere of the time. Obviously what this did was it left a lot of the everyday folk, the families and normal people in the lurch, right? They were forgotten while the people at the very, very top were enjoying themselves and wasting everybody's money in taxes. And so the artist duo created this depiction of the aftermath of one of these parties. However, shortly after it was installed, a cleaning person at the museum promptly did an excellent job of going in and cleaning up after the party, put everything in trash bags, and
my slide might be messed up here.
yeah, that's okay. So we can always, if anyone's interested, I can definitely pull up images afterwards, but what we are left with is documentation of this completely cleared out place, lovely white walls, concrete floors, and several trash bags in the middle of the floor, because upon seeing this installation, the cleaning person gauged and assessed that it in fact was trash. And she did what you do with trash, you clean it up. So Danny, what do you think that this says about public perception? What is art? What is not art? How can we respond to work when the instant read is that something other than art?
I love this actually, because we talked about this, maybe we're asking this question, what is art? It's some enormous question, which it is, but this janitorial person also asked themselves that question, what is art? And they decided, not this is not art. So it's garbage, and we throw it away. And it's a perfectly valid conclusion, although it's not, there's to throw away, but yeah, so the question is a real question, and it's funny how often this happens too. When I was researching for this conversation, the number of examples of art accidentally being thrown away was actually quite a few of those. And in fact, here, a piece wasn't thrown away, but we had a piece that looked a lot like a dustpan. It was actually earthenware, but you can't tell just by looking at it. And I kept getting reminded, somebody left a dustpan in the gallery. No, it's actually a sculpture. So this does happen, but it makes obvious the fact that sometimes it's difficult to tell if something is art or not. The line between the two is not always clear. Sometimes it's obvious, but at other times it's really not. And so I guess the question is, when it's not, how do we respond to that?
Right, and I think that what might come as a surprise to many of you, and even doing some research on this topic, is that people have very varying thoughts about this. So in response to the case study that we just referenced, there were Italian critics that said that the cleaning lady's reaction was correct, that art should be understood by everyone instantly. And if your initial reaction is that it's art, and if the cleaning person's reaction is that it's trash, then it is in fact trash. And the great kind of anecdote afterwards is that the curatorial team fished all of those bottles out of the trash and placed them all on the floor, which also begs the question that if the artists themselves didn't have to recreate it, is the installation still valid? So there are many, many layers to this question, and people feel very differently about it, whether you've had no education in the arts, whether you are a museum goer or not, or if you're someone with a PhD or you're an art critic, people feel very strongly and very differently about that question. Yeah. What is art and what is not art?
Obviously very strongly.
Very strongly.
Just came in and needed to make known on top of the work of art that they feel like it's not. So I guess, we'll take a look at some frequent offenders. I was calling my kid could do that list. So we'll take a look at a few. Okay, so I'm starting with some of these slides. It must be my USB here. But if you wanted to speak about a few of these, if we can go through these, and then we'll.
Yeah, it looks like maybe the aspect ratio is order correcting and moving it up and down. But while Danny's looking at that, I'm curious to know from all of you, because we do want this to be a dialogue, how many of you have walked into a gallery space and thought either my kid could do that or I could do that? What makes it art? Wow, relatively few of you. Let's ask honestly, has anyone looked at a work of art and thought, I could do that in my sleep? Yeah? Yeah, and then what are you usually left with after that reaction? Do you feel encouraged, or do you feel somewhat put off? Encouraged? You want to keep going? You're curious? Or somewhat put off, a little bit, bemused, and maybe a little bit out of your depth even, that you don't get it. Does anyone feel like that? Okay, so the reason that we're pulling up some of these examples is we want to show that there is in fact a time-honored history of that reaction. We've got several modern and postmodern pieces in here, and our purpose for doing this is twofold. The one is we do want to share some of the information behind these works that does in fact make them very valuable, but we also want to let you know that that very question that you have, like what makes this art when I think I could do this, that doesn't look that hard, or even a sensation of maybe repulsion or rejection, to reject that work of art. This is something that has existed for well over 100 years. So there's a tradition, a historical tradition of that sensation. And Danny and I want to be able to confront that and give you a bit of a pathway at the end of this talk as to what to do when you feel like that. Because it's been happening for well over a century.
Yeah, it has been, and I feel like saying that being upset about it is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of spoke about how like riots after Igor Stravinsky's operas, and I don't wish for like the destruction of property, but I wish people felt strongly enough about operas to riot about them again. And the same about art, instead of being passive aggressive, to feel really upset about it and then do something with those emotions. Because as curators, we talked about how apathy is gives us nothing to work with as curators, and I'm sure as artists too, working with an apathetic person is like being out of gas in the car.
Absolutely. So we can maybe do a quick click through of these. So the first piece that we showed you was by Malevich, which was his iconic black square. We're gonna do a little test here. Who felt, if we go back one, Danny, who feels that this is like a revolutionary, groundbreaking, absolutely stimulating, beautiful work of art? Hands up. Okay. All right, we're gonna test the waters again. We're gonna move to the next piece. Look at this gorgeous sculpture, right? Marcel Duchamp, 1917. This piece is called Fountain. Who loves it? Who wants one in their home? Yeah? I can get you one. Who feels like this is just a joke? There's no way this is a work of art.
A joke, yes. Yeah.
Joke.
Why can't both be true?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Very good question.
Can works of art be joke? You know what? We're gonna get to the piece later, but the one that turned me into a curator, I feel like I loved it so much, and it's because I felt like it was a joke, and I didn't realize art can be jokes too.
Absolutely. Why don't we go to the next one, Danny? All right, Rothko. Now, Rothko holds a special allure within museum goers because I think many of them know that it's important, right? Maybe don't know why. Who feels that this is definitely art, beyond question of a doubt? Okay, so that definitely tracks.
It's funny, but because he's been on the not great end of a lot of TikToks recently about my kid could do this.
My kid could do this. Yeah. And then we have a Don Judd installation here. Again, generally accepted, but I think amongst many audiences, not sure why this is accepted, but there's this kind of pervasive understanding that this is art, but does everyone know why this is significant? No? Does anyone feel like it's maybe a little bit basic, a little bit one note? Yeah, simple? Okay. All right, so what Danny and I wanted to do was to reveal, at first, the human side of these works of art. So sometimes what can really help us when we feel a sense of objection to a work of art, especially if it is conceptual, especially if it is somewhat minimal, you feel like you don't have a lot to work with, is to remember first and foremost that there was a human being behind this. Now we'll talk about this later. They didn't always create it with their own two hands, but they did come up with this idea, and that idea often had great meaning. So I really love to start with Milevich because although it's really, really hard to see, this this black square is a deeply meaningful, quite revolutionary work of art. So sometimes we have to remember that although we feel like we've seen it all, and sometimes artists are just kind of taking advantage of this permission to do whatever because anything is art, there are firsts within art history. And it's important to remember the courage that it takes to basically offer something up in a world that you know will probably not be receptive of it, right? So Milevich created this black square, and it's part of the suprematism general style, which was very short-lived. But basically, this work was produced during the time of World War I and the Russian Revolution, so the overthrow of the Tsar regime. So all of the artwork that came before this was to promote the regime's objectives, right? So very much, very much art functioning as propaganda, but as a form of control that was state-sanctioned. So during the fall of that regime, artists started to ask the question, what is the opposite of that, right? And to actually present something that was somewhat utopian, an idealist perspective. So artists such as Milevich, although he does really stand alone in many ways, they thought, how can we object to that type of work? And what they aimed to do was to really remove culturally specific iconography that you would typically see in still lifes, in social scenes, and in religious work of the time, and create work that anyone could understand or make. So work that was not just reserved for the ultra elite, for the autocrats of the regime. And their solution to that was creating works that veered much more towards pure form. So reducing the amount of input, working with relatively limited color palettes, black and white, different types of white. And although it is honestly hard to see at a first glance, when you learn about the work of art and the type of hope and inspiration and progress that it's symbolized, it does bring something very, very different to your understanding of it. But I will stress too, and I think that this is something that Danny and I would like to convey, is that knowledge is not just spontaneously in any of us. You have to take the time to learn it, right? And every arts professional and artist needed to take the time to learn that too. And I think sometimes when we look at a work of art and its meaning is not instantly recognizable, we feel like maybe there's something wrong with us that we just don't know automatically what this is.
It kind of feels like a joke you're not in on, an inside joke that you're on the outside of. But that is a good point and a good entry point to remember that there's a person that did this.
Mm-hmm.
I think about there are these TikToks, for example, that show what would it be like if we acted while we're walking, when we're driving. That we are so good at road rage in the cars because we can't see the person we're being angry. But you're walking and if like somebody cut you off while you're walking, you wouldn't yell at them or shake your fist at them, and because you see them. And it's the same way I think with art. When you start to remember if there's a person who felt very strongly about this, it starts to change a little bit. I was thinking about this piece. The artist mentioned when he came up with this idea for this square, he said he was so excited he couldn't eat or sleep or drink for a whole week. And maybe the idea to some of us might be dumb. We could make this in Canva really quickly. But this man was so excited about this that he thought of this idea himself that he couldn't even eat for a week.
Mm-hmm. Well, and actually to validate that, in fact, I mentioned earlier on that this type of artistic production was short-lived because when Stalin came into power, they really started to tamp down on this type of rebellious artistic expression, to the extent that Miljovic actually spent 6 months in jail for his type of artistic production. So not only did he feel strongly about this mode of production, but the state itself recognized the power that was inherent in it and jailed the artist. When he was released, he was given 3 options to either leave the country, so to leave Russia, to create work only for himself in a closed environment where it would never be seen again, or to create realist works of art that were obedient to the message of the new communist control that was coming in, which he did do. But that is really to emphasize that sometimes these seemingly simple ideas, a square on a white background, they hold a lot more weight, even to the extent of serving jail time.
It might not be immediately obvious what it's about, but you can kind of see it installed in an exhibition space in the corner, maybe literally the weirdest place you could put a painting in the gallery, right in the corner. And you imagine being in that space yourself, and you see this black square in the corner above your head. Some of the things you might feel immediately, not even knowing what his intent was. Somebody at the time would have recognized that's where usually a Russian Orthodox icon in the home would go. It'd be installed in that place. So it'd probably usually be a saint looking down at me instead of a black square. And so somebody at the time may have recognized that feeling. This weird black void is looking down at me, where a saint should be looking down at me instead. And also the idea that, like we were kind of speaking about, wanted to kind of reset painting, just hit the reset button on it. And how would you do that with a painting? Hit the reset button on painting. And that kind of looks exactly like how you would go about kind of starting that process out. So this brings us also to the point that you made, that we often think of art as being an image, like a picture, and sometimes that's not a picture, it's a square. And sometimes art is maybe not an image at all, but it's a trigger to make us feel something or to make us think something. Because it's funny, in here, Jason is a photographer, but this is the only thing that comes close to actually being photographed, and even then it's just a photogram. It's not even an actual photograph. None of these things are pictures in here, but they're more like triggers to get us thinking about stuff, but we'll get to that. But it does mean that if we can't necessarily come to art, we can't approach these things the way we usually would approach pictures. It's almost speaking a different language. But not knowing that can be really frustrating if we don't know how to approach other stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think that imagery gives us grounding and an entry point, right? So to a certain extent, it does make us feel comfortable in the fact that we can recognize something, right? And once we can recognize something, then I think we have the permission to free associate, investigate, try to connect that object or person or scene that's being represented to something in our own world. But in many instances, and I think this shows a perfect example, even if there's not an image that is educating us, telling us what to do, or basically providing a sense of enjoyment or pleasure, if we take a little bit more time, then those entry points are still there. But we're living in a very fast world where everything happens instantly. And the truth is that every single one of these works that we're looking at now, they do request time from you. Time can be hard, like we often don't want to yield that.
Yeah, it is really difficult. The person who did this in here would only spend a couple minutes of that even. So that brings a couple questions that came to mind that I'd love to ask all of you. First of all, when you approach a work of art that you feel like you don't understand, go ahead first.
Well, one thing, the person who did, and I'm trying to figure out what he did, he wrote not art, right? That was, did he do the eyeball?
Yeah.
So you said he only spent a few minutes. How do you know this wasn't his 5th time?
That's true, that could have been possible.
time he
Yeah.
made his decision.
Yeah, and does that make a difference? I don't know. I was telling some friends I was kind of upset that he made that call after only a short amount of time. In some ways, I'd be less upset if he came to that conclusion after a while. I'm still upset that he wrote over somebody else's work. I read that. That is offensive to need to say something by speaking over somebody else. That feels offensive. But you're right. He could have been here a number of
He could
times.
come here every day for a week.
Yeah.
To make his decision. You don't know.
Yeah, it's true. I wish I would have been able to give him a tour. But when you guys run into art that's not immediately apparent, like what it means, or what the artist is trying to get across, what are some things that you do to make sense of it, or do you feel like you just move on? Go
I'm
ahead.
trying to understand it. If I'm clueless about it, maybe I'll Google it or something, but I want to sit there, hopefully I have time,
Yeah.
to soak it in and figure out, what am I looking at?
That's a good idea. Googling, we've got our phone. That's a really good idea. What are some other
That would
things?
be more of a move on.
Yeah.
I mean, love to
Yeah.
say, oh, like I said, oh, you get to do that later, but
Yeah.
that's why I'm here.
Just keep on going. Yep. Yeah, that happens a lot. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I like to think about the techniques that the artists
Mhm.
use, the processes that they put the work through. Sometimes that can give you a clue, especially if it's conceptual art, like,
Yeah.
and also of course with
The wall text. Wall text is a great place to kind of start after you've already looked at the work a little bit. Go ahead.
I'm not artistic at all, but I do enjoy comics, and what I do is I look at the name,
Mm-hmm.
and I look at the theme of it, so then I try to imagine.
Yeah, the title of the exhibition and the art, that's good. Now, can I ask you, honestly, what do you wish artists would do to help you understand the work better? Is there, go ahead.
Oh, I'd love to be able to see an artist statement,
Yeah,
an explanation of what they're trying to convey.
very good. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, that's not always available in art shows.
Mhm.
If you've been juror to put in, they let you put in information.
Sometimes.
And the education is a real important part of it, like you're saying. So that information, does help the viewer. And you hope that they see something that they're interested in to spend some time.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm absolutely on the opposite end of that. I went in LA Art Museum a couple decades ago. A solid red canvas, solid, like this is something new when they had a solid black one 100 years before, and 3 typewritten pages as to why it was art. And I thought, if it doesn't speak for itself, it's not art.
That's an interesting idea that art should be able to speak without having to be
Yeah, if you-
explained.
If somebody has to come to you and say, all right, well, in 2010, there was an event, and this, no, if you don't look and know exactly what the guy, or feel something precise, then forget it.
I think also too, what's coming out here is the expectations that we have of a single work of art. And I've heard that sentiment many times, that, I think that's very much in line with the art is a universal language line of thought. And then at the same time, this has happened within museums where, for example, a work of art from say, Africa or an Asian country is displayed in an American museum. There's no way for that work of art to be understood by us, and I often think that could even be extended to people living in different states, right? People who are subject to different type of societal pressures or conundrums. I cannot know what someone in Missouri is experiencing right now. I just can't. And so a work of art, I think that there are maybe at least 2 ways that a work of art can be interpreted. One is with information supplied by the artist or perhaps the education department of an institution. And then the other is teaching us what to do and how we can gain meaning from a work of art on a personal level, even if interpretation is not provided to us, right? And understanding that sometimes that personal dynamic, that personal transformation, that is what is there for us to gain, right? Even if it is at odds with what the work of art is intended to achieve.
I do want to say, also from the curator's side, we struggle with this all the time too. How far do we go to explain the work of art? There's an interesting dynamic I never put words to, that the difference between explaining art to someone and interpreting it for them. Explaining is my job, and interpreting is your job. And if I start interpreting, that's kind of taking your free will away from you. Because what artwork means is up to each of us as viewers. Even the artist should not tell us what a work of art means. They can suggest it, but
Right.
and so towing that line of explaining and then letting the viewer do the rest of the interpreting, that's hitting that mark is really, really hard. But obviously sometimes exhibition spaces fall short, sometimes viewers fall short, sometimes we both fail to meet in the middle. I wanted to take a second to talk about those pieces that really kind of change the way that we look at what art can be. And
Actually, I'm gonna ask if we could pause on here real quick, because I did want to situate this show within, again, a much longer historical trajectory of people responding to works of art, right? So we have the defacement that occurred here, and if we, let's see, if we go back one, Danny? Back one again? Okay, actually, let's hop one back as well. So we touched briefly on the idea earlier on that Mark Rothko's abstract expressionist color field paintings are, widely accepted as being important works of art, real works of art, even if we don't know why. And he was an artist who was deeply invested in emotional communication. When he moved to this country, he was very disillusioned with American individualism and optimism, the sense that everything will be great no matter what, and really wanted to just kind of pour into his canvases this deep emotional state. I think one of his first big commissions was for the restaurant Four Seasons in New York, and he actually said on record that he wanted to make his paintings so miserable that everyone coming to the restaurant would just be filled with terror and dread and existential sorrow. And I think a lot of people, even a lot of people standing in front of these works can attest to a sense of awe, quiet, this depth of emotion, even without prompting from the artist. So maybe this does serve as an instance where there is something that is easily perceived, whether or not it's actually given to you as a viewer. But if we move to the next image, I did want to include that one of those works of art that was intended to go to the Four Seasons, Rothko ultimately decided to not follow through with that commission, gave the money back to the Four Seasons, and gave these pieces to the museums of New York. But in 2012, one of his works was defaced by an artist duo looking to promote their movement called Yellowism. And they used a black marker to sign one of Rothko's pieces and basically prompt people to look them up online and gain more traction. So sometimes works of art are judged and rejected, other times they're judged and basically violated like this to basically subvert that emotional moment that so many people do report having with these pieces. In the name of commercial and reputation gain, but ultimately there was justice served on this one. The artists ended up going to jail for 2 years, and it was cited causing $320,000 worth of damage because Rothko's, the way that he applied his paints and pigments were so specific, and this marker went all the way down to the actual individual fibers of the canvas. So massive recovery effort for this one. But again, this conversation between artists and viewers, and even the unwilling, these highly negative or damaging responses, there's a history of that as well.
Yeah. It's interesting how, speaking about the pieces that really changed the way we look at art and what we expect from it, mine kind of echoes that, but intentionally. I saw this at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. It's by Robert Rauschenberg, and it's an erased de Kooning. So de Kooning was an abstract expressionist painter, mostly, and Robert Rauschenberg took one of his drawings and meticulously erased it and then framed it and presented it as his own work of art, entitled Erased de Kooning. And I thought that was hilarious. That's so funny. I didn't realize artwork could be funny. It could be funny and serious at the same time.
My favorite work of art is a Botticelli called Adoration of the Magi. And it is full-scale Italian Renaissance master, everything perfectly rendered. But the perspective is incredibly forced. And the upper third of the picture is the manger, angels and everything is moving towards the Christ infant. And the entire bottom third of the painting is a giant horse's ass. Moving up. And I could just see all his friends going, son from the Pope, crucified. No, they'll never see it. Never, they won't get it. And it is, the whole one is just a big horse's ass.
So there's this whole tradition of it. I didn't know before I saw this really that it could be profoundly funny in some ways. But it's also saying some very serious things without having to read the text. You can kind of get a sense of what Rauschenberg is trying to say by erasing somebody else's work, spending so much time taking apart somebody's work.
Was the de Kooning in pencil?
It was, and to be and to be clear, he did ask for permission. He went to de Kooning himself and did get the piece, so that's kind of what really makes it different than this. That he went to de Kooning, he asked him for the work, and he did, and he did get it. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because that's really, I had certain expectations of art, and this piece kind of made me rethink that maybe my expectations are not quite there. That art does something that I didn't realize that it could do, or that it's supposed to do, maybe.
We have a question over here.
I came to the coffee conversation with Jason, which I just loved, and having done that, this made sense.
Yeah.
But then I saw this after this happened. When I came in, I thought, he's so clever. That is just fantastic. And I loved it. I thought the color is perfect, the way it's on there is perfect. It's just fantastic. I had no idea until I read something that it was a defacement. I thought it was intentional and super.
I was kind of tempted, I was joking with Taryn beforehand, I was kind of tempted to come in here with another piece of pastel and write on top of it, actually, this is art. And I feel like Jason would probably love that too. It starts the conversation, which is helpful. Sarah?
Can I ask, is this, I'm assuming you know who did this?
Kind of.
It looks like a practiced hand.
Yeah,
It
so-
looks like the hand of somebody who's confident holding a pastel and drawing on a wall.
Yeah, so I can speak a bit about this piece and the defacement specifically. With the defacement, there's cameras in our galleries, of course. And so I would suggest to anybody to not ever deface it, at least because you'll most definitely get caught. Any gallery this size would have cameras. But beyond that, no, don't know the person's, except that likely they're not local for whatever that's worth. But it is interesting, either this eye, or maybe it seems like it could be a representation of the piece, concentric rings on here. And it's, we wrote not art, point at the piece. And it's interesting how, contrary to what Jason is trying to say, Jason, as you might know from some of his work in the text, is that he was born with a genetic condition that makes his movements, his physical movement, very limited, very painful. Him being able to raise his arm is very difficult, or being able to walk can be very painful. He had a hip replacement surgery not all that long ago. And so for Jason to make these rings, the way he did it is we positioned a lift here, and his assistant was on the lift, and he would take the pastels and draw the bottom half of the circle and pass it to his assistant, who would draw the top half of the circle and pass it back down to him. And a lot of the exhibition, Underseers, is about seeing what goes under people's notice, seeing people that go under people's notice usually, or feeling like we're under the radar when we don't want to be. And I feel like that creating this exemplified that perfectly, which is why we left all the dust on the ground, because it's not about the piece, it's about how it was made. The idea of Jason needing to hand off to somebody picking it up for him where he couldn't go anymore, and her handing it back to him to finish the job, which is what we all should be doing for each other. We hand it off when we can't take care of it anymore. And then somebody to come in here and right on top of it to negate Jason's voice without asking him is the exact opposite of what Jason's trying to say with Underseers, which is exactly why we left it on there, to kind of have that conversation.
So, how did he write that on there? Was there actually the pastel down there that he could pick it up and do it?
Yes, actually, right here, you kind of still see some of the footprint on a piece that was crushed that was right next to it. But yes, just pick up a pastel on here, step over the stanchion and load it. And we put the stanchion here, not because it actually keeps anybody away, but Jason and I were talking beforehand, we need a way to signify to people that you can't just come in and draw on the wall. And if we would like people to do that, that's totally fine. I'm okay with doing that. But we need to show people how, we need to make clear you can't, that's not allowed in here, which is what the stanchion is for. It's to say it's not okay to draw on the wall here right now. And so, and we left it, like I said, we left the debris here on the floor because I wanted to indicate it's not about the circles, but it's about how it was made. This is the evidence of a performance that happened.
Hi, personally for me, when I look at a piece of art like you guys are showing some, even if I don't understand, it's showing the intensity of the emotion that the artist has when they're making that piece. And I might not like it, maybe a particular piece, but that is an emotion as well. You know, not having an emotion, it doesn't always have to be a positive emotion. It could be a negative or no emotion, neutral. That is an emotion, I feel, and that's the beauty of art. You know, if it kind of had the same response in everyone, that would be kind of boring.
Yeah, it's just like music. Go ahead.
If I didn't know that that was defaced, actually for me, that's the interesting part. For me, that's what draws me into it, to see that.
You know, and that's it, and in that way it kind of hijacks the piece, which is really kind of, it's unfortunate, because this line here mimics a tool that's used in physical therapy. You would put one end at your nose and stretch the other end out, and it helps train your eyes to work together, to have stereo vision, which is why this piece is called stereo blind. And so, kind of knowing that, you can start to draw what the metaphors would have been if that wasn't there, of eyes working together to be able to see in stereo vision, to your eyes have to work together to get depth in your vision, or ideas of concentric rings going farther and farther out from you. What might that mean in your life? But you're right, it now becomes the central focus and it just hijacks the meaning of the piece. But we left it up though, because now it brings a whole different idea. What is art is also a really important thing to talk about.
Absolutely. And I think too, that insight about how the work was created, you know, in collaboration with an additional person for support. I think that having the artwork be overridden by a third person really kind of pulls away from the way that Jason embraced working with someone else. The fact that he is creating the work in tandem and in collaboration with another person doesn't detract from his authorship. This is a process whereby multiple people invest mutually to create something of significance. And then the irony would be that a third person would come in, not in collaboration, but in condemnation. And there is such a history of artists working in solitude by themselves, having to have this stroke of inspiration to create works that will change the world and tell us how to think and feel. And he was doing the opposite here. He had a concept, but was really open about the fact that he needed support, he needed collaboration to carry it out, which is again so vulnerable of him, right? And then all of that is severely undermined by an additional voice coming in. And really, it wasn't erased, but it did completely detract from the heart and nature of the piece. Yeah.
I was wondering if we could fast forward to a question that you presented that I think is really, really interesting. I'd love to talk about, and it relates to the doorstops here too. The idea of we ask all the time, is it art? And there's the question too, though. Can we change that question to when is it art? Is it art? Instead of asking, is it art? Should we be asking, when is art?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that a little bit? The idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think too, to get us to that point, I think it's worth acknowledging for our gallery guests and supporters that we understand that often there is an expectation when you come into a gallery space or a museum. And I'd love to hear from all of you what it is that you expect from a museum or from an individual work of art or an artist. Oftentimes feeling disapproval about a work of art or an exhibition can kind of stem from our expectations not being met, right? We expected one thing, maybe we went into a space to be entertained or to be stunned by technical capability or to have marvelous stories and narratives told to us while we just receive, right? And if that's what you expected and you come into a show that is maybe more quiet, requires more time, requires more of you, then there's a misalignment in that can kind of take us to the point of saying, like, not only is this bad, but this is not in fact art at all. And where Danny and I found ourselves was really thinking about not whether or not the definition of something being art is important, but can we say that the more important question is, when does something become art, right? And so there's a fantastic American philosopher named Nelson Goodman who posed that question in the 1960s in his Languages of Art publication, and he basically offered the perspective that an everyday object can become art or not art depending on its context and how we read into it. So not even by the essential properties that it possesses. And likewise, a work of art, when removed from a specific context, can become an everyday object too. So his example was, if you took a Rembrandt off its stretcher bars and took it home and wrapped the canvas around you to use as a blanket, it would then function as a blanket, as an everyday device. Now its properties didn't change. It's still a Rembrandt, but the way that it's being utilized, the way that it's being approached changes its qualities symbolically. So,
and there's a few interesting examples we kind of talked about with that too, that I feel like it starts to point at some deeper issues. There's we're talking about sunsets, for example, how beautiful sunsets are. I think especially here we know sunsets are very beautiful, but are sunsets art though? And technically speaking, they're not really art. they, you know, even people even creative or artful, they're not fine art in the sense that like a painting. But if you take a photograph, which is maybe significantly less beautiful than an actual sunset, that is art. And why would the sunset, that is much more beautiful, not be art? The photograph is. So it's something other than beauty that makes art. The other one is a joke some kids played, also with SF MoMA. We talked about how they left glasses on the floor, and they hid and watched and kind of poked fun at everybody that looked at those glasses, thinking it was an installation or sculpture. And the kids were thinking, oh, these dummies are looking at a pair of glasses and it's not art. But I kind of love that because I think actually they're wrong. They just created an installation. That is art now. They just made that, and everybody's admiring it.
Yeah.
So it's but if somebody went to put those glasses back on their face, though, it's suddenly not a sculpture anymore.
Exactly.
And that shift, it feels really uncomfortable. Of something that is art and it's not art, and it's art and it's not art. It feels like sometimes that art should be a little bit more like a strong pillar than that, not so plastic.
No, I think that, you know, we've now had well over 100 years of artists asking that question. So what is art and what is their function as artists? I think it's worthwhile to point out too that many artists that are known for one particular style experimented and created works in many styles before they produced the pieces that we're most familiar with. So they kind of wrestled with questions of, you know, form and stylistic approach and what their subject matter is or should be before they came to the conclusion that we're most familiar with now. And also the idea that many of them were very critical of each other's work too. So they're responding to, you know, to different movements within the arts. Many of them happen at the same time. So this idea of disagreement about what is art, it's very valid, certainly not new. And then to add the complication of an object having like symbolically a multiplicity of purposes and functions. And then we as viewers bring differing expectations of what function it is we expect art to fulfill. It's complicated.
And I like that because that gives a lot of power to us as viewers. A lot of it is it's art because us as viewers decided to treat it like that. And it reminds me of the doorstops, because these are doorstops that Jason collected. Some kind of absconded with. In fact, he took one of ours from the door over there. And to me, that was not a work of art, that was a doorstop. And like immediately that night, I missed it because I needed my hands free to get through the door, and my doorstop was not there. And so it's just a doorstop, but in here on the wall, these are now works of art. But if I ripped one off the wall and I threw it over there, back to the door, it's suddenly a doorstop again. But something I love about this piece is that I would never, and probably you too, touch these with my hands even. I would never bend over to pick one up. I would never bend over to look at it. These are things we kick around, we shove under the door. We only miss it when it's gone. But now here on the wall is something that's very precious and very meaningful. I would love to hear what you all think about this piece, honestly. If there are...
I really like it, but what do you call that? What's that medium, or what is that? It's sort of like freestyle.
Yeah, this would kind of be almost a ready-made, because he didn't do anything to the doorstops. These are just doorstops he asked for, some he just kind of took. But yeah, all he did was arrange them and put them on the wall.
I think he put a lot of thought into how he arranged them.
Yeah, definitely. You're exactly right, because he sent me a number of different ideas, and this is the one he settled on. And maybe a good question is that is a good point, that he arranged in a circle for a very good reason. What are some reasons why you think he may have done that?
For me, I feel each of those doorstops have a story,
Mhm.
and that probably meant a lot to Jason, the way he's been collecting those, and like you told the story about the doorstop that, you know, you kick it outside, and that's the story. So I just love how Jason, when he puts together, it's like pieces of the story,
Yeah.
and then it comes together and it's like a complete story. And then it's up to me or to any of the viewers
Yeah.
to see the way we are seeing it. You know, to every person, it stirs some kind of emotion. First time when I saw this, I was like, really?
Yeah.
And then, you know, when you come and stand in front of it and you spend the time to look at each of them, for me, it's very important that every art piece, there's a story, there's an emotion that comes with it.
Mhm.
And what I notice is he loves circles. I mean,
Yeah.
most of the love pieces, not these, but
You're
that's
right.
also a circle, you
The
know,
clock.
so something stirs his emotion and he connects with that, so I just love that.
Yeah, so already without reading the text, you start to make connections. The circle here, circle on the clock over there, there's a circle here. He obviously made the decision for a particular reason. One kind of rhetorical question I'd love to ask is to kind of think about is, you made these insights into it, and if that's not what Jason had in mind, does that even matter? That's what makes art, I think, wonderful, is that, like, you can't do that with a sitcom. If you don't understand it the way the writers intended, you're gonna be lost. But here, what Jason intended is a suggestion, but those insights, they stay with you, and they're just valid. I appreciate the same thing. The fact that we get to look at these up close, there are weeks and days and years of people's lives inscribed on these things. There are routines of a woman coming to her classroom every single day, 5 days a week, for years, and they're notched into that wood. And now they're on the wall for us to consider this, and it's just one of those many doorstops on there.
I think too,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Danny. I love installations like that as well because not only that it's like salt and food kind of thing, you don't necessarily miss it. So doorstops are like that, you know. But to me, installations like this I've seen before with shovels and ocean debris, that kind of thing. And what is special is not only what they choose to put out there, in this case doorstops, but also the shadow play. So I want to be here like first light of the morning, where all the lines. At noon, what does it look like? And maybe 5 p.m. and then maybe at night when the lights are on. So the shadow that falls, like it's already changed.
Yeah.
As we were speaking, when I first walked in, it was completely different, and now it's completely different. So that's what I pick up on, you know. And even with the defacement, may I just add that the first time I saw that, I was so deeply shocked that the violation is what I felt. But when I went home and then I saw it online when you put it up as part of this talk, and I thought, you know, now it feels like there's a big story behind it, like the string with the pastels. It's almost like the joy of life, but then sometimes life has burdens and those strings are just like the challenges that you have to deal with. And then all of a sudden, like in person it was very jarring, but online it was joyful. Like now we're going to talk about this. So it brought that whole thing to a whole other place. And so I'm grateful for that you chose to, like, let's deal with it. Because, it needs to be done. This is what people have done, or this one person has done, and other people have thoughts about it. So I appreciate that so much. And I think this maybe, it's been a thought in my mind about, the value that people attribute to this. Like for some people, no value, and other people, it's precious. And I thought maybe when installations like this are coming around, maybe as the artist is beginning to make it, install it, do it, like draw a quarter circle, maybe a post about that, like, like look at who is working, like put his face and name next to that exhibit and just put it out there so that just a kindergarten circle.
Yeah, to kind of humanize the artist.
The artist
Yeah.
is there, there was a human being thinking about something,
Right.
so, it's a art.
That's a good idea. So if I could do one real quick experiment before we move on from the doorstops. We've been kind of explaining this to each other, what this means. And so now I can tell you what Jason was thinking, and this is crossing the line from explanation now into interpretation. That Jason collected doorstops because he was asked to remove the doorstop from his classroom. This was to increase safety for the possibility of an active shooter situation, of not keeping the door perpetually open. But for Jason, for example, having a door closed and needing to open it on your own might not be that easy. He might be thinking about, when I go to this place, is there automatic doors? Is there a button I can press? Is there somebody coming with me that can hold it open for me? And these doorstops become very important, and maybe in some ways they become metaphors for who is holding the door open for me, and who am I holding doors open for? And that might be what Jason was thinking. But now that I told you that, though, does that kind of close the doors on how you're going to think about this work of art? But maybe in some ways we might think, if we think something other than that, is that now the wrong way of thinking about this work of art? Go ahead.
I would say, to me, each one seems unique, but then it's a sense of community when they're all together. So to me,
Yeah.
I found it comforting.
I like that. I like it. Go ahead.
When I stood in front of this piece, I had that, what is this is what's going on here moment, and it took me a minute of like really looking at it, and thinking about it. And then I had this almost aha moment, and I felt like a real connection with this piece, and this ended up being my favorite piece of the whole show. I realized that these are things that open portals, and they are arranged in something that looks like it wants to open a portal. And it's something that we take for granted, this like opening of portals. And it's the way it's arranged, it makes it feel almost supernatural. So it's that whole tradition, the whole Dada tradition of elevating an everyday object to something that feels almost sacred. And back to your point of expectations, whose job is it to do that? And whose job is it to decide if that's being done successfully? If you're a doctor or a lawyer, there's a board that decides you get to be a doctor or a lawyer, but who decides you get to call yourself an artist? And is that gatekeeping? And is gatekeeping necessary?
That is a good question.
Well, I love the expression of works functioning as portals, and I think that it's one of the things that you and I were talking about is why so often does it seem that works of art and exhibitions are treated differently from, by those who experience them than say travel to a different country, or maybe going to a restaurant where you haven't tried the menu before, right? Or even listening to a type of music that you're not so familiar with. I feel like, if we almost approached it like, okay, we don't know everything that there is to know about this show. Almost like going on a trip where every detail has not been planned out, but we're just gonna go to have an experience, right? To have some personal growth, to be surprised, to discover things along the way organically. Everyone going on that trip would have a different outcome. Everyone would have a unique experience specific to them, even though they went to the same place. But you wouldn't be appalled if you arrive in a town or country and you didn't really plan that much. You were spontaneous, you bought a ticket, you arrived. I feel like there would be a sense of curiosity and wonder and an acceptance of the idea that you're not going to know everything about this location, right? And it is really up to you to make the most out of every moment and to kind of approach it with a very open hand and a mind that's ready for difference, and to be kind of caught off guard a little bit here and there, but to keep moving anyway. I think that it says a lot that we expect We expect so much of both the artists and of ourselves to walk into a place with often very little context, but to have a clear expectation of what you want that place to do, or that artist's works to do for you. What if we allow the works to surprise us, and to actually make that moment more about the ways that we are growing and transforming in response to that work of art, like going through that journey of first standing in front of it going, what is this and why does it matter? To taking the time and actually figuring out, like, what are the qualities of this work of art that I can discern right now, and maybe how can I connect that to elements in my life, right? I think that there's a personal growth there that visits to museums and galleries gives us.
Yeah, and that's a little bit frightening sometimes, but it is something that I love about art, both as a viewer, somebody who enjoys art, and as a curator, somebody who builds exhibitions, that this kind of openness when we come to an exhibition is not something we're afforded very often in life. When it comes to consuming media, like TV shows and movies and books, there is a correct way of reading those things, and there's an incorrect way of reading those things. But an exhibition, we're given the trust to read it however we want to, and that's not something we get very often. And that kind of freedom is a little bit scary sometimes. But to kind of cherish that, to come in and be open-minded and take time with it the way we have today. If you still don't like the doorstop piece, that is great, because you gave it some good thought and you've still come to the conclusion that you don't like it. But we explored it in all sorts of ways with nobody telling us how to do it. It's just, and we don't get that very often. And on the other end, as an artist or a curator, if you're either, the freedom there too is amazing, that if you want somebody to think really seriously about something, all you have to do is put it in the gallery. I have obsessed over these doorstops. If you want to put something on the wall, and I will consider it. I'll consider its history, its meaning, the possible metaphors, all of it. And that's an amazing thing too. No other place offers that kind of consideration. I think maybe only music might come close, but even then. So as we're talking about being faced with not understanding what an artwork might be, also that kind of wide openness is a gift that we don't often get in any other part of life either, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, and definitely the topic of the gallery and museum environment, I think that's a really a powerful thing to investigate as well, because display qualifies, right? The second we put something forth for display, we are inviting and also asking for that thing to be considered, to be looked at, right? Just like the pair of glasses, or maybe like a wadded up piece of paper in a corner, right? In any other context, it means something very different or nothing at all. And in one of these spaces, the piece is asking for your time, and you're also invited to take your time.
Yeah, it would be inappropriate. Like if I was studying these doorstops in my office, Andrea, my boss, would probably come in and tell me to do that after work. You have to, be weird with these doorstops. But in the gallery, it's totally fine though. It's okay. You can give as much thought about the most overlooked items in your life in here. So I really love that. Before we wrap up, I would love to hear some of your thoughts on the topic we kind of been speaking about. What some of the questions we've been talking about. What are some things do you feel like the gallery space could do? Do you feel like you would approach art any differently? Kind of having thought about some of these things now. Do you wish people would approach your art differently? Sarah?
I'm wondering, speaking of expectations in art, that's something that I've noticed in my role as a community works organizer, the mismatch between expectations that sometimes derail really good efforts. So I'm wondering if foregrounding that, talking about that more, and even maybe arranging exhibitions around an expectation, like do you expect art to be pretty? Do you expect art to be clever? Would that be something that we could try
we had the question we were speaking about before. When you don't like a work of art, what do you do? And as viewers, you don't really have a whole lot of choice, do you? I mean, you could post about it on Facebook or something, on Instagram. But what do you do in the gallery space? Because the artist is talking to you, so how do you talk back? And I think as curators, that's something that we could do. We can facilitate ways for viewers to respond back to the artist, because this whole thing should be a conversation anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so often what we hear from the public is that our guests and our community members, they're coming to the space almost in a diminutive way, expecting to be taught something or told something about art. And I know, Danny, with your programming and a lot of museums and galleries actually approach their communities and their constituents with a lot more respect than that, and a hope that we're bringing something to you that can be of value for you individually. Now that value is up to you to determine and to gain ultimately, and that's where taking your time and allowing yourself to sit in the discomfort of the unrecognizable, right? Or the kind of disobedient, that's not what art is, I really don't like it. Like, sit with that for a moment, and there will be value to be gained after that. But we are definitely no longer in the business of bringing you art, telling you what should matter to you, and having it be a one-way stream of information. And I think that's also an adjustment that takes time. Art and definitely curators and art historians have, for a long time been kind of put on a pedestal of having this type of esoteric knowledge that nobody else can gain. But we're really coming to our communities with a lot of compassion and a will to connect and to say, this is a dialogue that is meant for you. This is an artist from this area. There are likely many parts of their story that are relatable, but ultimately we do trust in our community members and the visitors to these spaces. Like, we trust in your intelligence, we trust in your openness, we trust in what has brought you here in the first place. Like, there is a goodwill there. We want you to know that it goes both ways.
Yeah, and I'm excited when people are ready to disagree also.
Yeah.
They're the most fun to give tours to because they feel strongly about it. Go ahead.
Quick question, when you said that, Jason didn't like having to close the door, was that literally, was he a teacher? You said
That's right, yeah.
I don't know anything about it.
So these two pieces kind of speak to each other. We needed to close the door for safety reasons, to not have an opening in the possibility of an active shooter situation. But opening the door with physical disability on your own could be very, very difficult, which I'm sure occurred in his mind. And this photogram right here is actually a photo of his door. And so the light would expose only where there's a window, and which is what that window is. It's the void. And I guess you could think to yourself, that's what an active shooter would see. It's just that window into his classroom. But to him, it's a closed door as well. It's a window into his place where he teaches new artists to be artists. And so it makes sense that these two kind of face each other. Okay?
I was a public school teacher several years ago, and we said that we live students had to not only keep the door locked, we had to cover them exam, and that's what that makes me think of.
I'm sure it occurred to him too. And then, of course, the metaphors of closed doors. We say that all the time.
Danny, what would you say, maybe ask Jason, what he thinks of this? I've been looking at this, and I'm thinking, did he think it's a square circle? Because all his painting is kind of geometric, that is too, but maybe he thought that is a square circle. I don't know, my brain just kind of...
There's a lot of echoes. And what he intended and what he didn't is definitely a question. And the other one is, how much does that matter too? I see the ridges on the finger ladders with the door stops and the triangles in the clock also. A lot visual echoes.
I have one quick thing along the lines of being a teacher. When I first saw that, that's exactly what I thought of, that, well, you're in the classroom, you have to not only close the door, but you also have to black out that window, and protect yourself. And so my point just being, is context matters. If you're aware of school shootings and what happens to them, I think every day parents choose to send their kids to school, and then kids have no choice, and then a tragedy like that happens. So that was just the exact first thing that all summer long, you think teachers have time off, but actually you're drilling, you're thinking about the sequence of events and all of that. So it's so powerful that even when you leave your classroom and you're not in it, you still worry about it and how will you respond so you can protect all these little lives. And so that was exactly the first thing that I thought of about that. So I just mean societal issues also are so indicative of, you bring them to the display.
I think a lot. There's, we're thinking really hard about these pieces, and I love that. I understand how that can be really difficult to set aside the time and the bandwidth in your mind when you go to a gallery, because we're not often called on to do this kind of thing. Not when we're trying to just enjoy ourselves. But if we can bring that kind of thinking to the gallery space when we go, and hopefully the curators and artists can do their job and meet you halfway there too.
And respect the space.
Yeah, of course, and respect each other's voices and opinions, to allow each other to be heard without speaking over each other. It's wonderful, but I love to hear from all of you. We'll call it here, but feel free to please come up to us and ask any questions, thoughts. I'd love to hear them. But I wanted to thank Taryn also for joining me and putting so much work into this presentation. Real quick, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say too that as time goes by, if any of you do think about ways that more connection can be made when visitors such as yourselves come to gallery spaces, outside of the usual like more didactic, that type of thing, if there's anything that you can think of, please be sure to share that with your your curators and your gallery staff. Definitely in the spirit of that dialogue. That's always information that we're receptive to hear as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention too, August 13th, we're coming back again here. August 13th at 6:30 p.m. We'll be here with Jason and Dr. Nashid Madian. He's the Director of Florida Humanities. We're going to be talking about what responsibilities do artists have to the audience, and what should audiences consider bringing to the gallery when they come. It'll be really cool, very thought-provoking, kind of picking up where we left off here. Panel discussion, questions, and Jason will be reading an essay on the doorstops. So join us for that. We'll see you then.